darle la bienvenida y por favor quiero pedir un aplauso para nuestro primer keynote speaker, Jeff Sutherland.
Gracias, Gerardo. Primero, lo siento para mi español. Mi esposa es puertorriqueña, hablas español. Mis hijas hablan español todos, pero muy poquito. Un día yo era jugando con mis hijas, 4 años. Yo hablas español, perfecto. Mi hija, Papa, why don't you speak English? So that's what I'm going to do today. So I'm going to talk about the role of leadership in an agile transformation and sort of where a lot of this comes from. So as Gerardo says, I'm the CEO of Scrum Inc. I work all over the world with companies large and small in various domains. I've written a couple books and articles and stuff like that. But what I really want to stress is that what really matters is agility in your context. Because I've done this in areas like defense, defense procurement, military operations, pharma, finance, healthcare, oil and gas exploration, government. So I've done this a lot of different places. And while it looks slightly different in some areas than others, there are certain things that remain the same. They're sort of root ideas, and it's really important, especially for leadership, to understand that. So I'll go through a few of those. So the idea, first of all, and you're gonna hear this a lot, is like, let's be agile. Now, being agile is a mindset. It has sort of values and principles, which I'll skip. But there's a bunch of different ways to do it. An unlimited numbers of ways. About Scrum, I'll talk about Scrum. Hey, I'm the CEO of Scrum Inc. But there are other ways. But those practices are in service of being agile, of being mentally agile, of having that culture, that mindset. So my father, who invented Scrum back in the early 90s, was a fighter pilot in Vietnam during the Vietnam War in the 1960s. Now, the greatest American fighter pilot was this guy named John Boyd. And he described air combat, and so he trained fighter pilots, is what he called the OODA loop, which is the silliest name ever, but that's what he came up with. So, and that stands for, you have these, this is his slide from like 1957, before they even had PowerPoint, that's why it looks this way. They have observations, you observe what's going on. What situation are you in? What are the forces acting upon you? Where are you in the space? Then you orient yourself. How am I in that space? Where's my competition? How do I exist there? Then you decide something to do. You have a hypothesis. And then you do it. Observe, orient, decide, act. Now, if you do this faster than your opponents do, or your competition does, you get inside their decision loop. And this is the whole point of Scrum, rapidly moving through this so they're reacting to what you're doing, not you reacting to what they're doing, because that's a much better place to be. So in business, observe, what have I seen? What's going on in the market? What research do I have? What's the reality? And then you orient yourself, what does this mean for me, for my organization? Then you decide what you're going to do. What am I going to do? And that decision is really a hypothesis. Given what I believe reality is, and where I am in that reality, I think this is the best decision here. And then you act on that decision. And then you get feedback. And that's the key, is a rapid feedback loop, because that decision and your idea of what reality is a guess. Might be right, might be wrong. You don't know unless you act. And as leadership, acting is what's important. So why are organizations going agile? This is data from, there's this group in the United States called the Standish Group, and they do project management analysis, tens of thousands of projects across the world. And this is the correlation. Traditional project management, about 28% of them fail. About 13% of them are on time, on budget, happy customers. And about half of them, maybe a little more than half, are late, they're over budget, customers aren't happy. And then in agile projects, about 40% are successful, 11% still fail. Agility is not magic. It can fail. And about half of them are late and over budget. So what you want to do is, there are ways that will make it more likely to get into that green. And that's why so many organizations are doing agility, because the likelihood of success increases. So there's a survey a couple years ago of leaders across multiple domains, and they said, well, why are you doing this? Why are you doing it? Because doing an agile transformation is hard, it's expensive, really changes your organization, which is no fun. Says it isn't. And about half of them said, faster time to market. About 44% said just delivery product, predictability. Do I know that this is going to happen? Can I count on it? And then about a third said just to lower risk. So that's why people are doing this. But the real reason is business outcomes. It's always the outcomes that matter. It is not the practices. It is not those agile ways of working. Those make it more likely that you deliver your business outcomes. But that's what you want to keep an eye on. And then to do that, you want to get business agility, and there's sort of two parts of that. One is at the team level, like your individual teams that are delivering products or services or whatever you're doing. And then there's the organizational agility. And the team agility, that's a solved problem. That's really, that's not hard to do. I can make, Scrum Inc. or any of these agile education trainers can accelerate a team, 4x in a couple weeks. It's not hard. Organizational agility, though, that's a little trickier. And that's what you need to worry about, and you need to think about as leaders. And this is how I think about it. Because these are the dimensions of agility from my point of view. I made them up, but prioritization, this is what I see everywhere. Can you prioritize? Are you customer-centric? Are you thinking about your customer, the end user, whether it's an internal customer, external customer, whoever is getting value from what you're making? Are you thinking about them all the time as you're doing the work? Can you deliver high quality, regular, predictable? Organizational optimization, which is a horrible phrase, again, I made it up, my fault, is your organization set up to deliver value rapidly? Or is it fighting you doing that? And then the culture and mindset. Is your organization or your people, everyone says, we want to be more innovative. We want to be more creative. But we're not doing it. Why is that? So I have these things like the mega issues, I call them. There's why that doesn't happen. Why that's hard to do. Because, that's pretty simple, right? All of you can look at that slide and say, yeah, that makes sense. We should do that. But it's hard. So I've spent a lot of time thinking and writing about why is it hard? Because it's not that people in the organizations don't realize it. It's not that you don't have really smart people working for you, but it's hard. There's a reason it's hard. Let me just tell you a story. So Duke Energy is the largest energy producer and supplier in the United States. They do basically from Ohio, you don't know if you know the geography of the United States, from Ohio down to Florida, sort of the southeastern quarter of the United States. They have nuclear power plants, coal plants, all the distribution lines, all of it. And they asked me to talk to them. I was speaking to some of their leadership, and I asked them, what is your biggest problem? And they say, on average, we have to send a truck 5 times to solve one problem, one customer problem, 5 times, 5 different trucks. But what's really interesting, if there's a hurricane, they call it storm time. If there's a hurricane, the power goes out in Miami. All of a sudden, all of these organizational silos, like the reason they have to go 5 times is maybe the right equipment's not on the truck because the people who are doing the truck don't report to the people who are putting the equipment on the truck. Or the people who have to de-energize the line so they can do it. So they have these silos, or the people who take the customer complaint, who actually understand the problem but don't communicate it well. But all those silos disappear in storm time. Everyone works together to get it done. And you know this in your organizations, when there's been an emergency, all those silos goes away. Saw this a lot during the pandemic. A lot of things that people said were completely fixed and not doable changed pretty much overnight. But then, when the storm's over, everything goes back to the way it was. And this happens over and over and over. One of my clients is in the British Ministry of Defense. This guy named Gwyn Jenkins. He's a 4-star general there. And he said, they can work in a crisis. You know, Russia invades Ukraine. They can respond to that because it's a crisis. But when they go back to headquarters, they use this phrase, this is their phrase, not mine, they lobotomize themselves. And they work in this strict, bureaucratic, slow organization. And you know, Gwyn was telling me, how can I get more productivity and creativity that I see in a crisis? You know, they had to evacuate, you know, their embassy in Khartoum about a year ago, right? And it was really, they did it really well. But in that crisis, they can do it. But why can't they do it every day? The first reason why, then this is my theory, the mega issue, is prioritization. Now, priority is a singular noun. So I did a Google Ngram search, which is where you can look up, because Google's digitized all these libraries and books going back, 200 years. And I searched for the word priorities, the plural. It didn't become a word until like the 1940s. Because in English, the word priority comes from the Latin a priori, it comes before. That's it. You can't have more than one. And so people don't do it. How many people here have more than, 3 top priorities in your organization? Yeah, I know a lot of you wouldn't admit it. That means you don't have any. And this is what happens. And I have pretty good data on this. This is not just me making this up. I actually have some data. So about 30% of people who work for you are doing stuff that you don't want, your customers don't want, and you don't know that they're doing. It's hidden. It's dark work. All this stuff, and that's because there's no transparency. Do you actually know what all of your people are doing? You probably don't. You might think you do. And then about 45% of your people are working on stuff that no one really wants. Be rarely or never used. The story I tell a lot about that is in Microsoft Word, there's an editor for the programming language Visual Basic, which I think has probably been used 12 times in the 30 years that Microsoft Word has existed. But think how much money they're spending on that. That's probably at least a couple of teams, 10, 15, 20 people for 30 years. That's hundreds of millions of dollars spent on something that people don't really want. Like I know at Adobe, they started taking features out of Photoshop because it was too complicated. And there was lowering adoption. Can you imagine being one of those really brilliant engineers at Adobe doing this really cool visual, image manipulation, thing that's really hard? Spend a year of your life doing it, and they say, yeah, no one's using it, they pull it out. That's like digging ditches and filling them in for a living. That's just a waste of human talent. And really about a quarter of your people are working on stuff that's really good. That's because you don't prioritize. I'll just give you a couple examples of this. So one group that Scrum Inc was working with is an IT support company. They saw that slide and they went back and the leadership said, okay, what is everybody doing? And they found 300 people doing support for Windows 7. This was like in 2015, 2017. Instantly freed up 300 people. And I see this a lot. People are working on things that nobody wants. And it's not that they think it's important. But the priorities from leadership are not clear to them. Now, in sort of junk stories, so Patient Keeper is one of my father's companies, and they had the thing of, we won't build things, they did hospital automation, until we have 4 signed contracts saying someone's going to buy it. So they spent a lot of time not making things. The value of work not done. Again, it's focusing your effort on people what actually want. And then, and this one blows my mind. So we went to Toyota in Dallas, Texas, right outside of Dallas. That's where Toyota North America is. And they had 200 people working on this dealer incentive program. Hey, you sell a bunch of cars, we'll give you a little bonus from Toyota itself. That does not seem that complicated to me, right? All the data's there. And they'd been working on it for 5 years. 200 people, 5 years. I don't know, what is that? A couple $100 million? And they delivered nothing. And one of the things we did, and I'll talk about this a little later as well, is we said, who's actually doing work? And who's talking about doing work? Or who's talking about doing work? And we went in and we just found that out. And it was actually about 20 people were actually the engineers who were actually building this thing. The people, or people talking to the dealerships and getting feedback from it. And they delivered it in 6 months. It's crazy. It's crazy. Like, that's an infinite increase in productivity. People often said, you're going to get twice the work in half the time, which is the subtitle of one of my books. And I'm like, that's easy. This is infinite. So what's the next reason people can't be agile, organizations can't be agile? And that's because you can't deliver. Now, in the software business, and kind of we're all in the software business at this point, software has eaten everything. And this is data I got, it's 2018, 2019 data, so it's a little old, but pre-pandemic, and this is American software companies. About 43% of them could deliver stuff about once a week at best. Think about how long it takes people in here to deploy your software. Once a week seems pretty fast to some of you, I bet. About a quarter of it could do it every day. And Amazon Web Services, with 3,000 Scrum teams, was delivering functionality more than once a second. That's fast. I mean, I've talked to people at Amazon, I'm not sure if I want to work there, but they're really fast and they're scary. They're scaring banks. In the United States, they're terrifying the pharmacy business because they said they might get into it. And so over the past few years, there have been $100 billion mergers of all the pharmacies freaking out because Amazon might get in their space. And they know if they don't defend it, they'll die. And the reason you can't deliver, one of them is people confuse being busy with being done. You always want to know, are my people busy? How many hours did they work, right? How many hours are they at their desk every week? I should know that. The managers often say, are you working? What are you working on? I want to know what you're working on. Are you busy? Are you working on? Well, if you measure busyness, you're going to get more busyness, right? Like, who cares how busy they are? From my point of view, I care, are they done? Are they delivering value? You know, if they're delivering value really rapidly, hey, go surfing on Thursday afternoon. I don't care. And so, but our goal is to deliver working product at pace with the needs of the market, stakeholders, and customers in mind. That's the goal. So that's the only thing as a leader you should care about. Am I delivering value? You're gonna hear a lot about Scrum today and Scrum at scale and all those things. Those are how you do it. Those are tools. Those are practices. But as leadership, are they delivering value and how fast? So this is from a government leader, one of the governments I work with. And they said, listen, she was like, they do support their citizens in living a healthier life, sort of that kind of stuff. They make lives better. And she was saying, well, why isn't everyone just skipping to work? We have a great mission, right? We're helping people, we're making people's lives better. We're spending their tax dollars to increase the economy, increase the health, increase the vibrancy of our society. But just like in the Ministry of Defense in the UK, they go to work and they can't get anything done. And this is one of the big motivators of humans, actually doing stuff with value. There's a lot of psychological research on that. People feel better when their work is meaningful and has an impact. But often, and especially in governments, but not especially in governments. I've seen plenty of organizations which are slow too. It's just like, how come I can't do things? Everything's stuck in committee. There are all these handoffs to the next thing. I just can't. The rules are too many approvals. So I thought why is that? And I've come to the conclusion, because as I said earlier, I care about the culture and the mindset. But if you look at the research, what creates culture? That culture of innovation, that mindset of creativity, of possibility, of aggressiveness, getting stuff done. It's not having an offsite for your leadership team for a day and talking about, your values and how we love each other and culture is really important. That doesn't work. I mean, those are important, but those don't change anything. Because your structure dictates what your culture is. How you do the work and how you have your people do the work determines what your culture is. Let me show you how this works a little bit. So this is I was talking to Brad Freitag. He's the CEO of Claris, which is this, it's an Apple subsidiary that we worked with. And I interviewed him just not that long ago. And he said, we needed to make a cultural change. Now, they're a global company. They have, Sunnyvale, California, London, Tokyo, Asia, a couple of other locations, Central America. And he said, we need a more agile organization. That required the culture change. But then he said, to do that, we had to change how we were working. And the reason we don't is because of the specialization. This is from a Canadian philosopher who I really like, from a book of his called Voltaire's Bastards. And he's saying, and I love this quote, the division of knowledge into feudal fiefdoms of expertise has made general understanding and coordinated action not simply impossible, but despised and distrusted. I see this in organizations all the time. Oh, those guys in legal, I don't trust them. Those guys in contracting, they're not going to give me what I want, right? Parts of your organization distrust other parts of your organization, which makes it really hard to operate in a focused, coherent way. And that's what Brad wanted. How do we do that? Because this is what you have. You have your organization. Usually, you have your leadership on top saying, hey, here's what we want to do. And you have some function that has their set of priorities from leadership. Okay, to do this is our piece of that. And then they work on it a little bit. Then they hand it over to the other function, and their budget's probably separate, right? You're funding them separately. And they do their piece, but again, nothing can be delivered yet. So they hand it off to another function to do it. And all of these functions have different priorities. They aren't aligned together. And so they don't have a collective or shared view of what's actually important. And this is one of the things that agility does, that Scrum at Scale enables. It's having that shared, coherent view across functions. And then your resource alignment, where you're spending your money, where you're putting your people, don't align to those priorities, right? Everyone wants more people, more resources in their function. You promote them, right, when they have more people. Oh, Julio has, now he has 500 people reporting to him. You should get a promotion. Give him the VP title. I don't care how many people you have reporting to. Are you getting stuff done? Are you delivering value? It would be great as a CEO. I would love one person delivering the value of 300 people. I tell you, my board would be happy with that. Really happy. The other thing you do is you get scared. Organizations get scared. And they say, okay, I need to have those decisions come to me to make sure it's okay. Because, this is an important decision and leadership or management really has to weigh in on it before we can let the teams make a decision. Now this is data from the Standish Group. I was talking to the CEO of the Standish Group, a guy named Jim Johnson. And he said, the more likely success of Agile projects versus traditional project management, because that's correlation, that's not causation. He says, what is it that it does? And he said he found this data and he didn't even publish it for like 18 months because he said, no one's going to believe me. Said his rule of thumb is every $1,000 you spend on a project, a decision has to be made. 90%, 99% are trivial. Should we buy a new printer? But he said, in his data, if you could make a decision in an hour or less, something like 75% of those projects were successful. And if it took more than 5 hours, only about a quarter of them were. 5 hours is not a lot of time. So the other thing you need to do is, at what level do decisions need to be made? There's certain decisions you do need to weigh in on, right? I talk about often, if you're in a boat, there's certain decisions, if it goes below the water line, a hole in the boat will sink the boat. So that's what you think, but most of the decisions are above the water line, where they can make a decision, and if it's a mistake, they can just roll it back. It's not that big a deal, and you learn from that failure. And this is pretty easy to measure. Then I want to talk about how, as you're doing this and making those rapid decisions, this is some of the impact. So I was working with 3M, this is a few years back, and when they acquired Scott Safety, that makes personal protective equipment for firefighters, things like that. It's a $2.5 billion merger. If anyone's been through some of those big mergers, what usually happens is both organizations freeze and they don't make decisions because there's all this regulatory stuff they got to do. They're worried about merging everything. It freezes them for usually a year that they can't do anything except the merger. Some of you have been through things like that. So one guy I was talking to, who I trained and who did a product owner training with him, and he did this. He said, we're going to do this merger as a Scrum team. And in these mergers, there's a lot of different, especially a big one, there's a lot of different functions that have to go in. I'm just showing you 5 here, but there are a bunch. There's legal, there was R&D, there was manufacturing. Both these companies do a lot of different things, right? And so what they did is he said, we're going to meet as a Scrum team with all the different representatives from the functions. We're going to meet 3 times a week. And we're going to have a visible backlog. What are the priorities for that merger? What are the things we need to do over the next couple of months? And it's transparent. And of course, there were 3M, so it was all on Post-its on the wall. And what they were able to do was they were able to seize market opportunities because it didn't freeze them. So I was talking to the lawyer who was on this team. And he told me, listen, JJ, we make personal protective equipment. And I'm in the legal team, one of the leaders in the legal team at 3M, and they're involved in probably 2,000 lawsuits at any one time, right? Someone falls off a ladder, smacks their head, 3M padding was in there, they file a lawsuit. And he said, if I just got an email saying, hey, security needs this decision about this merger thing, that's going to be buried in the 50 emails I got about all these lawsuits. And I don't know how important it is. But because it was transparent, he could say, wow, if I don't make that decision For security, now, in a week, they're just going to be stuck, and they can't do anything without my function weighing in. So it's getting all the functions together. And what was really interesting to me was that, sure, some of these organizations, this is a big company. It's like 30,000, 50,000 people. Like their R&D organization was Agile all the way down, right? They had Agile teams. They did a Scrum at Scale thing. They were this, as was their IT organization. Their legal team wasn't. Their manufacturing teams weren't. The HR wasn't. They've done a little stuff with HR these days, but it wasn't. But this is sort of the alignment process. By aligning the leadership of those different functions and saying these are the priorities, from a certain point, from a leadership point of view, do you really care how they're organized? I mean, I care, but I'm a consultant. I can deliver faster stuff if they're like that. But aligning the priorities, so it's not that your entire organization has to transform overnight to be able to align your priorities across the organization. Just got to make them clear and transparent. I'm going to talk a little bit more about your role as leaders. So I think this is really important, because I'll tell you, the number one way agile transformations fail is leadership engagement and support. If you're not going to get behind it, don't do it. You're going to waste your money, waste your time. Just don't, because you need to be involved. So, and you need to say, what does success look like? So I was talking to this guy, Jeff Johnson, who was at the time the CTO of the FBI in the United States. And they were digitizing their case file system. And they'd spent like 10 years doing it. Lockheed Martin was doing it. They didn't get anywhere. They spent like $400 million. They had a lot of money in the US government. They spent a lot of it getting not much stuff done. So like $50 million. And he said, okay, I wanted to create a measure that the teams can look at and it will impact their decision making, and that I can bring to my stakeholders, Congress, the director of the FBI, the Attorney General, and they will be the same metric, and it's valuable. So the thing about the FBI, the reason they were doing this is 9/11, the big report after 9/11 was the FBI actually knew everything was going to happen. They knew about the plans, but they knew different parts of the FBI knew different pieces, and they never connected the dots, right? That was the failure. It wasn't the failure of like the agents out there doing stuff. It was an organizational failure back at FBI headquarters of how do they share information. So Jeff said his metric was how long does it take for the whole of the FBI to be aware of what one part of the FBI knows? And he really liked that because he said, I'm talking to the person who's designing like the user interface for data entry. Hey, how fast is that to get the data in there? And that is going to impact that level of decision. What's the technical infrastructure we need to make sure that all that data flows? What are the security requirements? All that kind of stuff. But it's all trying to change this. And then when he's getting yelled at by Congress, he says, this is what we're measuring and this is how it's changing. So I thought that was pretty clever. Now at John Deere, we worked with quite past few years, they said they had the same thing. This is their global IT group, which is about, 3,000, 5,000 people across the world. And this guy, Ganesh, who's the CTO, he's now the CTO of American Airlines, just pulled up, he pulled this off, and then American Airlines said, hey, could you come do this for us? So he said what he wanted to do is, and measure, so from his point of view, from the C-suite level, and what he was communicating to his boss, the CEO, is the speed of understanding. How long does it take for us to learn something? Whether it's a market signal, a demand signal, or there's a problem. How long does that exist before we know it exists? All right. And he said, the next is the speed to decision making. Going back to the decision lazy. Once we know there's an issue, how long does it take us to make a decision about what to do about that issue? Let's go back to that OODA loop. You observe, you orient, then you decide. Then the last thing he wanted to measure, okay, we've made a decision. What's the speed to execution? What's the speed to that act part? And this is stuff he says, that's the stuff that my stakeholders wanted to know. And he says, what I wanted to know. And so his people got together and they said, okay, well, those aren't quite, those are understandable by the teams, but we want some more finely grained metrics for the teams. And it's really interesting. So this happened over the course of about 18 months. And the first metric they had was just sheer output. How fast are their deploys? They baselined it. About 18 months later, 165%. Speed to action, right? Speed to execution. Might be the wrong decision, but at least they're doing something. The time to market was reduced by 63%. Okay, that the speed to understanding of what the market need was. How fast did you go from that to supplying it? Went down 63%. Then they also had the engineering ratio. This is sort of like that Toyota example. They said, we don't want more people than is absolutely necessary not being hands-on, what they call hands-on keyboards, doing work that creates value. And their target eventually was 75%, and it was below 50. It was below 50%. And so, but even with, they had Scrum Masters and product owners and Agile coaches and all that stuff, and HR and managers, like, you can't get rid of all the managers. You need some, but not as many. And so that was like how many people are doing the work. And it went up even though they put all those Agile structures in place. And they also said, we want to save money. Ganesh tells me, he goes to the board, and they're like, yeah, IT is expensive. Let's save money. Let's do all this stuff with cheaper, which for them was contractor costs. They cut their contractor costs by 20%. And yet they were doing all this stuff. They were doing more stuff with less people. Then the other thing they cared about was, how happy are people to work here? How engaged are our people? Because especially in a field where your people can move from place to place, in technology, that's really true. They can walk out the door tomorrow and get a good job somewhere else. So you want people to want to work for you. And for John Deere, this is really important because they make, tractors. You're really going to get the hot software engineer from Silicon Valley wanting to go work at a 180-year-old company making tractors? Now, they actually do some pretty cool stuff. But they said, we want our people to be happy. And part of that was changing the way they work. And they measured it by employee NPS, Net Promoter Score, and then it went up to a score of 65. They had a 42-point baseline. Basically, NPS is how much would you recommend on a scale of 1 to 10 what to do. So I will skip ahead because I'm running out of time. So here's the key slide, and I'll end on this. So this is what I asked persons, 50,000 person organization who did a pretty successful transformation. I said, what are the keys for leadership? I want you to tell me what you would tell them. And he said, the leadership team's commitment to not tell people to do Agile, but to demonstrate it. That's what does it. And after these 4 things, he said, you got to educate yourself about what it is. It's not enough to say, hey, you go do this. You have to educate yourself because you want to change your organization's outcome, not some function's outcome. You want to work in an Agile way yourself. And again, does this mean being on a Scrum team? Maybe, maybe not. But it means an Agile mindset, an Agile way of working. Do you have clear priorities? Can you get impediments up from the people at the line? Have you pushed decision-making rights down? Have you done that? Do you work in an Agile way? Having the highest quality backlog. Your priorities are clear and everyone understands them. Anytime someone comes into work, and it could be your most junior employee, they pick something up and say, this is what I'm supposed to do today, and I know why. I know how this ties into my organization's strategy. And you got to defend the teams. Because you're going to get some organizational pushback. That's just the way organizations work. There's going to be resistance. It's like the immune system. That just happens when you change an organization. It snaps back. It wants to snap back like a Duke Energy. So you're going to have to make the space for them to do it and defend them from that corporate immune response. So, gracias. Muchas gracias. I think we have time for maybe one question, but I'm happy to do it. But thank you so much.
Well, somebody might like to make a question. It can be made in Spanish. Pueden hacer la pregunta en español, perdón. Yo solo quería chilerear para que vieran que yo también hablaba inglés. ¿Preguntas?
Come on. No one has a question?
They are very shy today. Well, you know what they say? No question, good news.
All right, one. Thank you, sir.
Hi, congratulations and thank you very much for sharing your knowledge. So how long does it take to move an organization, about 10,000 people?
I'm sorry, I have a little bit of a hard time understanding.
What's the time frame to change the culture in an organization for about 10,000 people?
I'm going to kind of take the easy way out and say it depends. But, John Deere did that over the course of about 18 months, 2 years, I would say. It took them, they wanted to get farther to actually hit a lot of their serious metrics, and they're still doing it. Because natural transformation doesn't end. It's like, it becomes how your organization operates. So, it takes a while. And if you're doing it, I was talking to this, Brad, the CEO of Claris, was telling me, he said, listen, they've been working on it for 3 years now. And he said, listen, if I know how hard this is going to be, I might have stopped, because it's kind of overwhelming. But he said, but now what I would tell other CEOs is, start now. Just start now. Because when's the best time to plant a tree? The best time to plant a tree was 30 years ago. Second best time is today. Because it does take some time. Gracias.